Racial discrimination in the advertising industry is in the spotlight this week. The South African Human Rights Commission has begun its first sitting of an inquiry which aims to address and avoid the publication of adverts that carry racial undertones. The hearing was sparked by the Clicks advert in 2020, which described black women's hair as, quote, dry and damaged. Now, anti-racism activist Zulaika Patel, who is currently giving her testimony, says she believes the country, or should I say Clicks ad, was racist. Joining me now for this conversation is Advertising Regulatory Board CEO Gail Schimmel. Gail, good morning to you and thank you very much for your time. The fact that the South African Human Rights Commission is holding such hearings, does that concern your organization?
I don't think it concerns us. It concerns me a little bit that it's taken 2 years from the Clicks incident for the hearings to be heard, because we certainly reacted more quickly in terms of looking at what the problems were, looking at what we could do to try and fix some of those problems, and reaching out to the industry around those problems. But the fact that there's these conversations are always important. It's always good to have these conversations.
Okay, let's talk about the advert itself that sparked the nationwide protests in September of 2020. The Equality Court has since ruled that that advert was not discriminatory. Do you welcome the judgment?
I have to be honest, I wasn't aware of that. I find it a very interesting judgment. I mean, I think it is a given that advert was poorly checked and poorly thought out. It's far from me to disagree with the finding of the court, and I haven't read this finding, so I don't know what their reasoning was. But I think it's generally agreed in the industry that what happened with that advert was that there was a poor process of checking, and that somebody involved in the early stages of that ad possibly did not have the right training, did not have the right sensitivity, and just there was a certain level of ignorance in how it was created.
Yeah, so I take on board that you have yet to familiarize yourself with the contents of that judgment, but as I hear you speak, what you seem to be suggesting is that independent thought, basically on reflection, the advert was indeed racist.
I think it was at best, it was a very unfortunate advert. It was poorly thought out. Was it racist? It's a difficult one, and like I said, the court is is better position than me to make a finding about that. And I've done a lot of thinking about it. I think there's a lot of ignorance involved in how people receive that advert. For example, that the word fine hair was attached to a white woman's hair. Fine is not a compliment when it comes to hair, and I think there was some misunderstanding around that. I think there were nuances like that were perhaps overlooked in the initial reaction to the ad, but I don't want to underplay that. I think labeling white hair as normal was problematic.
Yeah.
And that's where the core of the problem of that ad lay, because certainly in South Africa, white hair is not normal. Maybe in shampoo terms, white hair, for historic reasons, is the starting point of normal. But that's not okay. We need to be relooking at conversations like that. We need to be educating ourselves around how we look at categories like that. There's a lot of conversations that need to be had. But I imagine, and again, without having read it, that the court's finding relied on issues like that there was not an overt attempt to be racist, and I certainly have seen much worse advertising.
Sure. Zulaika Patel, as we mentioned in that intro, Gail, she is an anti-racism activist. She says that if it were for her, some kind of board, some kind of accountability board needs to be set up in order for the advertising industry to account whenever such adverts are allowed to go on television, be it online, wherever. But the bottom line is that someone needs to monitor what is coming out of the advertising industry in order to guard against what she sees as racism, particularly directed towards black women's hair. And I can't not ask you this question because you are the head of the Advertising Regulatory Board. Do you think that you do your job well in guarding against such things?
Okay, I think I need to go back to basics there, but because the first thing to understand is we are a reactive organization. We react to complaints that we receive after people have seen advertising that bothers them, whether it's because it's misleading or offensive or racist or a number of other grounds. So as we stand, are a reactive organization. What she's calling for there is censorship. And I don't know how old you are, but I'm old enough to remember a time where South Africa was subject to a lot of censorship. I am always uncomfortable with talk of censorship, with talk of having to pre-clear advertising, to pre-clear communication before it's allowed to go out into the world. So I don't think the answer to the problem lies in censorship. I think the answer to the problem lies in understanding, first of all, how wide the problem is, because if you look at the Human Rights Commission's inquiries terms of reference, they're talking about 5 ads they've picked up over 20 years. 5 ads in 20 years, given how many ads there are, is that a huge problem? Is that something to now introduce this worrying issue of censorship? That's the first thing. The second thing is, so we need to research how big the problem really is. I do think, having said that is there a big problem, I do think there's a bigger problem than we realize, because I think that the type of racist advertising, and this goes for gender as well, the type of discriminatory advertising that is a real problem in this country is the subtle racism, the subtle gender discrimination that most consumers don't even pick up is going on. So I think we need research into that. Second thing we need is education. This would not have happened if there had been better education of junior copywriters, junior staff, because there is no doubt in my mind that this was the action of a junior copywriter or a junior staff member. It wasn't high-level advertising. It was a little online ad. So we need better education. And those are the things I think we should be talking about before we jump to censorship. Censorship is worrying.
Gail, Schimmel, thank you very much for your thoughts on this. Advertising Regulatory Board CEO.